Now, if we can get together and if we can emphasize the rich world to eradicate, to wipe out this greed, we can enough for our need. What can we do for that?
I get your point. It has to come from individual level. No amount of government intervention can stop that. Government can regulate that, but government cannot produce or increase or remove the greed inside you. This has to come from individual level. What makes ourselves happy?
You have to start looking at water. Water is in short supply. So if you look at water, to produce 1 kilo of beef, it takes 14 tons of water. To produce a kilo of pork, it takes 7 tons of water. To produce a kilo of grain, it takes about 3.5 tons of water. So in a situation where water is a constraint, the easiest methodology for addressing protein deficiency is through grain.
Water is the next final frontier, and I think it is a resource which we have to use in moderation and the right use. There is no point in using your resource wastefully if you have plenty of it. Thankfully, thank God, Sri Lanka is blessed with a very nice resource. But this is something which should really be treasured and used in moderation. Thank you.
The conference will now present Professor Budhi Marambi.
Defining food security is not a good idea in such a forum. But if you go through the definition of food security in the whole world, there are 101 definitions. So I thought I have to make myself clear and which definition I'm going to follow, and I'm going to follow the definition forwarded by the Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations. In the World Food Summit that was held between 13 to 17 November 1996 in Rome, Italy, this was the definition of food security that people agreed upon. And exactly 13 years later, from 16 to 18 November 2009, the definition for food security expanded further, and they ensured the nutritional dimension is integral to the food security concept. So that is the base which I'm going to make this presentation today to you all, to talk about the present status and the issues related to food security in Sri Lanka. Mind you, when I say food security, the nutritional security comes into picture always. In such a forum, the slide that I'm going to show you now is the last slide that I made. In order to set stage for me to go ahead with the present status, I just thought of telling everyone what I see about Sri Lanka's economy without presenting any statistics. This is what I see about Sri Lanka, what I feel about Sri Lanka. It's a trade-dependent small economy and vulnerable to external shocks. It's a net importer of food, might change in the future. And the weak local currency has made imports more expensive. Economic prospects have improved considerably by the ending of the civil war in 2009. You all know that. There are enough justifications for all those things. Coming to the most recent past, poor monsoons and weak external demand would dampen the growth in 2012, the economic growth I'm talking about. And finally, the last point is the one that I want to tell you. This is not my prediction at all. I've also learned from senior economists of this country. Yet, the country is forecasted to be one of the Asia's region's stronger performers in 2013 to 2016. Remember, all these things will set the background when we speak of food security, food and nutritional security for we Sri Lankans in the future. If there was a terminology that was discussed and has achieved or attracted the greatest attention of we Sri Lankans, GDP is the term, gross domestic product. Thanks to the 99-day-old strike, trade union action, carried out by the University Academia in the past. And I'm not going to talk about that 6% today. But what is more important to see is to how the GDP growth has taken place with respect to different sectors in this country. And that will give you an indication in terms of food security, in terms of agriculture, where we stand right now. This is how it has gone through. Fluctuations, ups and downs, but the more important part is the dark blue segment of each bar, which occurs right on the bottom, which shows the change in the agriculture sector, its contribution to the gross domestic product in the recent past. The bar does not give a healthy picture, the length of the bar, but the important part is the contribution, at least in the past few years, though it's fluctuating, starts showing signs of being significant in the future. And mind you, even if agriculture sector contributes by 0.001% to the gross domestic product of the country, that is itself is one of the most significant things to happen in this country, because agriculture keeps all of us together. There's no other activity in this whole world that keeps societies together, that integrates sectors and ensure countries move forward. That is the key, and that is the key with respect to food security as well. Well, this is a slide that was presented earlier, but since we are a net importer right now, as if happening right now, of food, the global food prices, as the previous speaker quite correctly mentioned, it's a price crisis rather than a food crisis. So the price crisis affects our food security a lot. The first graph, the upper figure was shown to you, but look at the lower one. We thought we have reached a peak in food prices globally in 2008 when we had the food shortages. Fortunately, Sri Lanka did not experience it much because of knowingly or unknowingly adopting certain favorable policies with respect to agriculture and achieving food security from the year 2007. But in 2011, if you look at the bottom graph towards your left-hand side, there was a peak of food prices in the world, which went even beyond the peak that we experienced in 2008. Fortunately, in the last few months, the prices have been going down favorably. So we sincerely hope that it will continue in that manner or keep stable so that our food security will not get drastically affected because of the changes in food prices globally. If you look at the Sri Lankan scenario direct, if you look at how the food prices have changed in the past, until 2012 January, this is a graph which I borrowed from the annual report of Ministry of Finance and Planning, which was produced very recently. It says there have been fluctuations as usual. The issue why I'm presenting this data is that all the economists, all the scientists, the food scientists, agronomists, and so on, they have a very clear picture that is the accessibility to food has been the major issue than availability and other things with respect to food security in Sri Lanka. I'm sure it's true in most parts of the world. So changing in food prices, price spikes will affect not only Sri Lanka but the whole world, but our case, we are more interested in our own condition. Food price spikes. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2008-2009, as I told you a little while ago, we have experienced a very high price increases, changes in the whole world. But if you take rice, for example, that has behaved dramatically differently compared to most of other foods that are found globally. In Asia, we know it's the major staple food crop. Rice price increase was at a much lower rate than the international price for most of the countries, but Sri Lanka was right at the helm. In 2008-2009 period, the rice price in Sri Lanka increased by 75%, which was the highest increase that has been shown by any country in the Asian region, followed by Bangladesh, 52%, and compared to 95 to 135% increase in world rice market prices at different locations, different time periods during the past decades. Okay, the equation. We are talking about food security, but what is the equation that we are going to look at? As the previous speaker quite correctly mentioned, the world population is increasing. The latest figures say it has reached 7 billion, and it's going to go up to 9.3 billion in 2050 based on the estimates.
So this is your chance to ask the additional questions.
In your presentation, you were talking about the meteorological forecasting. Is it in operation in the so-called developed world right now? So-called developed world, is it?
The models have been developed using the general circulation models through an APN-funded project which took place between Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And one of the senior meteorologists from Department of Agriculture in Sri Lanka, Dr. Ranjit Punyawardana, is a person who got involved in. And this information is now being made use by the meteorology department as well as UNDP, for example, in developing their programs.
The conference will now present to you Dr. Nobel Jayasuriya.
We heard that nearly 1 billion people in the world go to bed hungry every night. 1 billion people are thought to suffer from hidden hunger. This is where there is deficiencies in nutrients, minerals, etc. And therefore, a reason for physical and mental impairment, hidden hunger. At the same time, 1 billion people are over-consuming. No wonder Buddhi said, according to his presentation, there is so much food in the world. So 1 billion people are over-consuming, and that also leads to problems, because it leads to problems like diabetes and cardiovascular problems. A recent report compiled by Her Majesty's Office in London by the Chief Scientific Advisor to Her Majesty, Government Office for Science in London, called The Foresight, The Future of Food and Farming 2011, very specifically says that the global food system will experience an unprecedented confluence of pressures over the next 40 years. On the demand side, there's a population increase. We all heard that from the 7 billion to 9 billion by 2050. On the production side, there is competition for land, water, energy, etc. And of course, influence climate change as well. And this will become increasingly apparent and influencing the global food situation. But Oxfam says our world is capable of feeding everyone. We heard that before. If that is the case, why is that 1 in 7 people go hungry every day? Again, we went through this earlier on. To me, the reasons are complex and multidimensional. Things like climate change, shrinking land and water resources, because of rapid human development, etc., globalization are some of the obvious contributing factors to this, among many others. Once again, I need to define food security, even though it has been done before. For the simple reason, I will need to emphasize on some specific terms. According to the FAO, food security, the definition of FAO, food security is when all people, at all times, very important, have physical and economic access, sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Now, this can be explained in another form, and this basically covers all these 4 aspects. The food availability, where there must be not only sufficient quantities of food, but there must be appropriate quality. And this is where domestic production as well as imports are concerned. There is a need for distribution of food properly, and of course, as I said, the quality. Not just food, any amount of food, but quality food. There need to be access to the food by individuals, because we say that food is a right of the people and must be affordable, given at affordable price, and also the preferred food. People prefer certain things, so it must be made available to them. Then the food utilization. It must be nutritious and safe. We have lots of problems with food sometimes. Not safe because of various reasons, pest control, drugs, whatever things added to the food. And then, of course, the stability means access access adequately at all times. So these 4 criteria really look after food security. So it's not just simply availability of food in terms of, let's say, rice and some basic food materials, but we are now looking at a nutrition basket, nutritionally adequate food basket, which perhaps has to contain things like sugar, milk, dal, whatnot, vegetables, and so on. And this is a basic right of the people. So if you consider all that, then the question comes up. To me, therefore, food security is not synonymous with self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency is one thing. There are many countries that may not be self-sufficient in food. Take, for example, developed countries like Singapore or even UK. They may produce one type of food in abundance, but they may have to import certain other things. So while self-sufficiency is important, it is not the same as food security. That is the view that I hold. Food security is actually a problem of underdevelopment. That is the way I look at it. It's a question of underdevelopment, and therefore, if you want to have food security, you have to have sustainable economic development, so that in case of calamities, you are able to purchase the food from outside. You must have your economy developed properly so that food will be available to people, at all times, in sufficient quantities and quality. So, therefore, my view is that while we need to move towards self-sufficiency, there has to be certain other aspects of development. That alone, self-sufficiency alone, will not lead to food security. Because we look at all people at all times. Let's very briefly look at the Sri Lankan scenario. We have gone through actually some of these things. We have a very high, relatively high GDP at the moment, per capita GDP, 2,400. The latest figures I saw yesterday was 2,800. Better than Maldives, better than most of the countries other than Maldives and Iran. 70% people are dependent on agriculture, and our agricultural GDP contribution is about 12%. We have a 92% literacy rate and a human development index of 0.69, which is quite high. However, our average calorie intake is below the requirement of energy.
Questions?
I have one suggestion. In addition to 3 agenda, which I am working now, I am really have an intention, strong intention to give some government policy report made by myself, delivered to the Sri Lankan government and Korean government too also.
Well, perhaps, yes, it's a good thing if you can give that report. I'm sure the National Science Foundation will be very interested in receiving that kind of information.
This is a platform maybe through that perhaps Mr. Fernando and Mr. Samantha could lead this initiative and make it so that the private organizations can also contribute and take the country forward. Thank you.
Okay. I must say that we spent quite a substantial sum on R&D, which does not get into the national figures. So we've got separate labs, we got personnel, we got various developments which we have brought into market already, and we have got an ongoing program where we are doing research into various areas. So we have a program already within the company for R&D, and which is where we have about 4 or 5 PhDs working for us on those programs.
Okay, next in line is me. Let me first start to say that I missed a key element in the whole lineup of solutions or things, the things to do list. And one of those things is I've nowhere seen a budget for marketing. Let us realize that when I buy a pack of chips, the bag is more expensive than the little bit of food which is inside. And that's a fact, because people in their mind, they want to know that they buy a quality product, and whether you like it or not, it's the way you're going to present it. And basically that's what it is. So for me to give a global perspective of a global